Hi everyone. Well, the second presidential debate is approximately 2 hours and 30 minutes, or just under 2 hours and 30 minutes away. My prediction is that Senator Barack Obama will win the debate. Why? Because it's not just that it's the economy that's at issue, and the economy is an enormous problem, and a problem that arguably was created under a Republican regime. It's deeper than that. Senator Barack Obama and the Democratic Party understand what, when, where, how, and why government intervention is required and needed to repair our economic problems. By contrast, Senator John McCain and the GOP, the Republican Party, are philosophically opposed to government intervention. They express a belief shown in the Republican Party platform in markets. But because of that, they do not address the need to correct market failure. Again, it's against their idea that markets always work. Markets do not always work. Ladies and gentlemen, the problem with our American economy is deep, and it is long-term in the nature of its development. Let me explain to you a perspective you're not going to hear. There are three problems, three developments that have occurred in the American economy which has gotten us to where we are today. The first one is in something the Bureau of Labor Statistics calls the civilian labor force participation rate. It has stopped growing since 1993, and in 1999, or starting in 1999, went on a constant decline that leads through today. The second problem is in the overall job growth rate historically. Again, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we added 20 million jobs each decade, but come the turn of the century, we stopped adding jobs at that rate and basically flatlined. And while that was occurring, that flatlining, which I'll show you in more depth in one moment, a third reason for our problems was just developing. Our rapid, historically incredibly highest rate of annual increase in the use of debt, sending our consumer credit debt to record levels. But more importantly, not just that they're at record levels, but the rate of growth was almost 3 times what it was in the 90s and through the 20th century. A remarkable development. Essentially, ladies and gentlemen, as we've stopped producing jobs in this economy, we've used our credit more and more and more to make up the difference. And now we're at the point where we need to pay the piper. Let me show you in more depth what I'm talking about. This chart is the civilian labor force participation rate. The Bureau of Labor Statistics calls it Civ Part 1. I call it Civ Part 1. But I want you to look at this. I went back, all the way back to 1967. Take a look at this chart. We see a steady growth in the people who choose to basically go out and find a job, make themselves count in the labor force. It grows all the way up to right about what is 1989, 1990, right in there, 1990. Then, a funny thing, it basically, for all practical purposes, grows at a much lesser rate. Look at that difference, okay? And then at about 1999, here, down there, it stopped growing. And from 1999 through to present day, which is down here, okay, it's been decreasing. Decreasing. That's the first chart. Now, this second chart is for civilian employment. It's called CE160V. I call it 1XLS. I added that. But this is civilian employment. And look at what I'm talking about here. We've added from, again, 1967 going forward, each decade, roughly 20 million jobs each decade. But when we hit here, right here at just before 2000, 1999-2000, right there, this rate of growth in the civilian employment rate decreased, so that it we did not produce the 20 million jobs that we had seen in the past, 20 million jobs per decade. In fact, we arguably, just by looking at this closely, only produced roughly 5. Here's the other problem, ladies and gentlemen. It's total consumer credit outstanding. This is the first leg of the third part of the problem. Starting in 1940, where we were roughly at just under, well under $1 billion, more in the millions, but then we increased to $1 billion by just after 1995. But right after 1995 and the $1 billion, look at the dramatic growth in consumer credit outstanding. Now remember our job statistics. This is at almost exactly the same time that civilian labor force participation rates were going down and job growth flatlined. But look, we're spending more money on credit to make up for the difference, so that make up for the fact that we don't have as many people working as we need to have working to basically have this at a manageable level of growth. Look at that. Look at that. Outstanding. Now, that's the first leg I said. Here's the second leg. Debt. This is gross debt and public debt. Note, two are relatively equal, but then again, starting in 1980, they increase, but during a recessionary period in the middle of the 90s, they decrease, but then at 2000, again, at the time when we're starting to experience declining civilian labor force participation rates, and also during this period of declining rates of job growth, we have what? A massive increase in debt. Massive. So that lays it out, ladies and gentlemen. The basic problem is loss of jobs. Some of you will go back to what you've heard on television or someone else say to you that it's the subprime mortgages, and it's not. The basic problem, even with subprime mortgages, is you have to have a job to afford to pay them. That's the bottom line. Not every person who went through some type of adjustment in the loan payment schedule had a job. For example, in Atlanta, last fall, Delta Airlines laid off over 6,000 employees. Many of them got their new homes through mortgages like the ones that we're talking about. But again, they lost their jobs. The bottom line is we have had decreased costs because of hyper competition in the airline industry, and whole industries like, for example, telecommunications decimated by international competition and our failure to compete with a sound industrial policy. The problem is jobs and a living wage. We don't record something called the underemployment rate. In other words, how many people are just working but not making enough to make ends meet. We only record the unemployment rate. We've got to start recording an underemployment rate. But back to the main point, Senator Obama recognizes these problems and will win because he understands cognitively how to fashion a plan or advocate for a plan that will help us. And speaking of advocating for a plan, in my next video, beyond the next video, I'm going to present to you something I call the Zenny Plan. That's right. It's a plan to help people at the grassroots level not just survive the economy, but essentially help the economy turn itself around. That's the plan I call the Zenny Plan, and I'm sure that when you hear it, you're going to like it. It's not just a plan. It's also a bill, and it's something I want you to help me advocate.